the AI Chronicles new episode, and today's topic is something the majority of you might be interested in or already working on it too. For this particular episode, I invited Rahul, who's passionate about building AI solutions for improved human experience, and I am very excited to talk about community building, MLOps, fine-tuning LLMs, and so much more. So, how are you doing, Rahul?
Good. I have my coffee in my favorite mug.
Ah,
It
perfect.
gets me going, and
Uh-huh.
it's a nice Monday. It's been very cloudy the last few days, so this is a great start to having a very nice conversation, and we'll talk about some of the most exciting stuff that's out right now.
Yeah, sounds exactly perfect. So, are you ready to dive into the discussion into some interesting and trending topics?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's start with community. So,
Sure.
I personally believe firmly in building AI community and talking about the geeky tech stuff with like-minded and curious people.
Yeah.
And I know you have been immensely involved in doing the same through MLOps community because I know I met you through one of the hackathons you organized.
Exactly.
So let me ask you one question around that. So, what would you say to encourage all the curious folks to participate in these community activities?
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me. I think a little bit about background about what, like my journey onto why I'm doing community stuff. So, I started my career back in 2010 working in this agent space for Toyota,
Mhm.
did a lot of good research, then joined a data annotation company, wherein I grew a team as a director of data science to serve like million predictions per day kind of scale at 36 different models. And then finally, working on my own thing as well as a few clients that I've been doing. From a technology perspective, I think I was super excited to do these, latest generation of AI and latest hottest topics being here in Silicon Valley. But at the same time, I think like while one part of me is doing work, I really
Mhm.
wanted to feed my soul. So the work helps me feed my belly. The work, the stuff that I do with community helps me feed my soul. So that's primarily why I'm doing it. And I think the way I see community is it's not like events that are organized one after the other. It's more a place for like-minded people to gather, like you say, and be able and open to talk about the certain things. So if you're coming to the same MLOps community meetups every couple of months, for example, even if you cannot make it to every event that we have, you're just catching up with everybody else, right? Because you've seen them before. And I must say, both on the community organization side, Demetrios, Adam, Lily, and everybody, Dan, Steve, everybody on that side has been super on point about making sure that this is the best thing that we do for the people and the
Mhm.
community. And on the community side, the people who show up, very thankful for them for making this happen. We have some exciting new projects and events lined up. So I'm hoping that what people get out of coming to these meetups
Mhm.
is a sense of like, can I talk about the specific problem that I'm facing with like-minded people, as well as learn and grow. Right at the end of the
Exactly.
day, I think everybody wants to grow their professional as well as personal experience about what we're doing here in AI, and it needs to be fulfilling for them. So we're just trying to put out programming where people can learn new stuff and be excited about it, which is why one of those things was the hackathon we did last year.
Right, right. No, I totally am with you on that. And I think from what you said and from my own experience, I think growth and networking are like the highlights of these community building or community activities. So yeah, I think those two words are powerful enough for anybody to get encouraged and, participate in these activities.
Yeah, for sure. And I would just put one caveat, like don't think of attending meetups as like there's no immediate ROI on like you
Hmm.
attend one meetup and then you get a new job, or you attend one meetup and you get this. I think meetups broaden your like what you're thinking of and maybe give you
Right,
some new ideas to think about. And think about meetups as a more like, if you do regularly go to the same communities that you really like, eventually the network effect will just get good things happen to you. And I think there's some truth to that even for myself, the kind of
right.
work that I do with community. I meet so many interesting people that I learn from every time. So I think that is what you should be aiming to get out of a meetup, which is um, you learn something new, you meet really cool people, and you grow. That's the high thing.
Yeah. Would you call it as your most rewarding experience in the, especially through your work at MLOps?
Yeah, and so last year, the MLOps community, Ansh created this amazing community in San, or kicked it off here in San Francisco.
Uh-huh.
And as you know, last year was insanely popular for in-person events in San
Oh
Francisco. So
yeah. Yeah.
we were at a point where we were having one event per month, and it was fulfilling because I had a day job, which was like really intense infrastructure level. How do you deploy large language models
Mm-hmm.
on like 200 nodes kind of a cluster, but at the same time meeting people and understanding what their motivations are, how are we together building AI, and all of these things was super nice. We had a couple of really good events. We had Women in MLOps, which I was super proud to be one of the organizers for. We had a couple of other events like the hackathon, where genuinely the people I met at the hackathon, I'm still in touch with. Somebody on your team, Ethan, if you remember,
Yeah, yeah.
he and I catch up every couple of months, and it's made good connections and good professional friends.
That's great. I hope we get to catch up more now that I'm finally
Of
moved
course.
into the city.
There we go. You should.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So that actually gives me a good segue into my next topic, which is MLOps. And I know that you have plenty of experience in that arena. So, talking about infrastructure, so what's the infrastructure you use or you have used to build any LLM or ML applications? So, it would be nice if you could talk about it from the perspective of, I guess, shipping these models into production.
Yeah, and I think your question is very well on point. I think ML ops is a um, exercise that you do to ship your models to production, right? If you're doing just core data science and you're just trying
Mhm,
researchy stuff out, you don't necessarily need ML ops. When you need ML ops is when you have a team of people, and
mhm,
all of you guys are trying to uh, ship a feature or a product powered by AI, right? And so
mhm,
you come together to do this. Now, your team sizes may vary, your tool stack internally that you guys prefer might vary. I think personally, I am a big fan of Kubernetes. I believe in um, you know the flexibility of me picking and choosing a tool and putting it on Kubernetes versus doing it myself, wherein I can containerize the models and then deploy it. So one of the cases we did where we had about 36 different models in production, we did not use Kubernetes. We did use scalable container system orchestration, but the containers was the high part, right? And I think
mhm,
when we started with containerizing, how do you containerize models? How do you make sure that they are performant? Are they HTTP services? Are they batch prediction? Are they based on a queue? And so then that goes from Flask to,
mhm.
like, do you want to do some queuing with Redis or some other queuing technology like Kafka? And then batch predictions. Where is the data coming in from? Is it coming from
Right.
a secure storage object store? Figuring out how the data moves through the models and how the model moves like from prototype to production. I
Mhm.
think the more flexible of a framework you have as an MLOps practitioner, you can move fast.
Right.
At the end of the day, the number one thing that you want to do is make sure that your product team, your engineering team, and your data science team is getting faster feedback, right?
Mhm.
The cycle of feedback shouldn't be 6 months. It should be like
Right.
weeks or days or hours, right? And so
Mm.
um, picking tools that work for your team, given the size that you have, I think is the most important thing to consider here.
Right. So do you think like depend I mean, yeah, I can imagine like whatever use case you're working on, whatever your product is, I guess the infrastructure might vary.
Mhm.
S- So is it like any general tools that you would advise people, especially people who are interested in getting into ML ops? Like
Yeah.
would you advise any standard ones?
Yeah, so definitely understand how containers work. I think
Mm-hmm.
from a tooling perspective, there's two angles. One is there's no right answer that to your
Mm-hmm.
question. It is not like I'll say pick this tool, this tool, this tool,
Right.
and you are set for life, right? I think in all engineering practice, you are doing trade-offs. You're doing trade-offs of cost, scale, and time to completion, right? And so figure out what is the thing that is on top of your team's mind right now, and then pick a tool that makes it you ship fast. So for example, instead of containerizing your own thing, you might say, hey, can I just use one of the automated containerization services and do that? If you really wanted to worry about scalability, and let's say high availability, instead of using a simple message queue, you might use Kafka powered by Confluent, which just makes sure
Mm-hmm.
like all of these messages have guarantees, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's all trade-offs, and at the end of the day, you choose what you and your team is most comfortable with. Personally, I prefer to containerize my own models. I prefer to containerize everything. That just gives me flexibility, as
Right.
well as ship everything on Kubernetes, because then I separate out the infrastructure side of things, like how many nodes or how many machines are there, from
Mm-hmm.
what is running on those machines. And I think that separation of concern, I really love about Kubernetes. Almost all the tools that you have in MLOps, they have a here's you can use it on our cloud versus you can deploy it on Kubernetes on your thing. So I think choosing this is how you go about choosing a tool. I think the second challenge which most enterprises will face, and if you're in an enterprise building this stuff, it's even if you have a shiny solution or shiny tool that you really like, or if there's something that is revolutionary you still want to use, I think the challenge you're going to face about picking a tool is from the business side of things, which is like, do you
Yeah.
have contracts with it? Is your data
Mm-hmm.
going out? Are they an approved vendor and things like that? So from an engineer perspective, you can decide on the trade-offs, but at the end of the day, your business is going to make a decision based on like, hey, am I getting service contract with them along with the tool that I use? So this is there an SLA in place wherein if there's
Mm-hmm.
downtime, they'll fix it for us, right? So those are the kind of higher level discussions that maybe somebody in the leadership role might be thinking of.
Right. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So, yeah, I personally was never involved in that ML ops part, but it always fascinates me. It
Yeah,
takes me time to actually go through all of those concepts, but I know that it's such an integral part of building any applications for any enterprise.
yeah.
So, that leads me to my next topic, which is my favorite one, which is fine-tuning LLMs.
There we go.
So, what is the best part? And to before I ask the question, I know like there has been such a debate going on online, especially like, okay, so now that we have RAG, should we still do fine tuning or should we combine everything and so on and so forth? So, what is the best part of fine tuning a large language model in your opinion and experience? If you can give us an example, that would be great.
Yeah, and there are three things that I thought about when you shared the questions. I want to make sure I cover all of that. So the first thing you need to understand is LLMs are glorified autocompletes. They've been trained on a lot of data, and
Hmm.
given a prompt, they're just going to complete whatever
Yeah.
you're given it to, right? The second one is all LLMs hallucinate. Some do it better than others, right? So think about the generative aspect of large language models as a hallucination in itself, but because you are prompting it, you're giving a few short examples or things like that, it can generate it. And the third part is a large language model is a language model. It is not a database. So
Hmm.
you should be thinking about using a large language models in these three kind of senses. So let's come back to this question, which is RAG versus fine tuning. And I think it's not either or. You can do both. In fact, some of the
Yeah.
research work that I'm doing right now is doing fine tuning and RAG both. So let's
Hmm.
let's take a step back. Where are you using retrieval augmented generation? Is when the answer is present in a context in a database or a function or a RESTful call, or it is present in some semantic search kind of a uh, use case, right? And so retrieval just helps you fetch that answer, provide a shorter context to your language model, and return it. I wouldn't use a language model as a database to answer questions directly. I would definitely use either a functions API or text to SQL or vector embeddings like most people do with RAGs to build that out, right? And think
Hmm.
that is part of where do you use RAG. I think before RAG, you can do a lot of prompt engineering. You can do a lot of few short examples. Excuse me. You can do a lot more things with your prompt along with RAG or without RAG to make sure that the use case is on point.
Hmm.
So eventually you'll realize, well, my number of instructions that I have in my prompt are just too many, right? You'll say, oh, don't mention a competitor. Oh, if the user is asking for a contract, then don't say this. Because like literally, I think a couple of months ago, there was this article about I gaslit Reddit and
Mm-hmm.
the car company, instead of saying yes, our EV is better than a competitor, named the competitor and said how that might be better. And in fact, there were some other examples wherein the chatbot went into a $1 quote unquote contract
Yeah,
about it.
yeah.
And so
Mm-hmm.
you get into all these things, you start realizing your prompt is getting out of hand. So now the question is this the right thing for you? Maybe there's a brand that you want to provide. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
there's a domain specific language, right? So for example, in medical case, you might want to choose um, for the doctor, you might want to speak in very medical terminology, but for the patient, you might want to do an ELI5 kind of a explanation. So there's a lot of like places where the voice, the tone, the structure of your output, and all of these things need to change from the default model that you have, and that's where fine tuning comes in. So
Mm-hmm.
again, you do your prompt engineering and few shot, then you do your rag if you need it,
Mm-hmm.
literal like real time data or newer data, and then you
Mm-hmm.
go towards fine tune. And I think it's a journey of like trying different things out. At the same time, you should have a single North Star metric that you are using, and then iterate and improve. And then you can figure out whether you want advanced drag techniques or whether fine tuning really helps. And that you'll only be able to do through some metric that you're trying to improve over time. I think that's the ops part about LLMs and prompts that not a lot of people have experienced yet, because it's like literally last year is when everything kicked off with LLMs, right? So we're
Yeah.
still early days, and a lot of people have done these Jupyter notebook fine tuning. A lot of people have
Mhm.
done these RAG, simple one question, one answer thing. But then you go into multiple step of questions. You figure out, hey, this is not the right architecture. What's the thing that we have to do here? Or like I said, with fine tuning, you realize you don't really want to answer directly, even if the user says, sign me a $1 contract. Do we have a deal? You say, sorry, I'm not authorized to do contracts
Exactly.
here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where fine tuning comes in. So it's not a either or question. It's more like a what is the right things that you want to
Yeah.
try, and make sure your accuracy or your scoring metric that you use improves over time.
So yes, I'm guessing like for the first time, if people are doing, it's more like trial and error approach, and then they can just improve upon depending on what the use case is, I guess.
Correct, but then for that you need to know like have a test suite of like maybe 100 or 50 use cases.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is a question, what is the answer, and maybe red team it with your team, right? Like which is finding questions that the users might ask
Mm-hmm.
to trick the model or to trick the thing, and then you add specific examples, specific instructions so that those things don't get done. And I think Andre Kaprati was talking about this, which is we are in an interesting era of programming wherein the most impactful programming language right now is English, right? So
English. Mm-hmm.
you need to think about, hey, can we write the prompts really well to make sure all of these things work.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with that. So, yeah, so awesome. So we basically spoke about community, we spoke about ML ops and fine-tuning LLMs, and so we have all these components, but I know there are these agents that help streamline everything. So I'd want to discuss the autonomous agents for a bit with you.
Yeah.
Have you built any of those, or do you have any favorites?
Yeah. So actually, this is fascinating. So go a little bit step back. I've been doing a lot of fine tuning research because
Mhm.
I'm very curious about in which use cases does fine tuning work or not. A lot of these Jupyter notebooks talk about like, hey, this is how you fine tune, and they'll show you like, hey, this examples it works, but they're not actually doing data science because they're not comparing loss curves. As you very well know, in data science, you're looking at the train loss and val loss, and you're
Yeah,
seeing if you're overfitting the model and all these things.
exactly.
And these Jupyter notebooks don't have any of that, right? So I wanted to figure out like what is fine tuning useful for exactly.
Hmm.
But the reason why I've been doing that is because I really believe in how can we use AI to help improve the human experience. And a lot of human experience is burden, which is like, I really don't want to do this, but I have to do it because that's the only manual way in which I have to click through stuff, right? And so the problems I am kind of thinking about right now are more like, what is software, or how can the software help you or agent help you when you're not even there in the room, you're not even in front of the machine? So obviously when you use ChatGPT, you are asking a question, it is giving you an answer, right? It's great. But let's say during this call, you and I are talking about, for the next 15 minutes or whatever, half an hour together, we are here. There's a lot of work that is on pause right now. What do
Mm-hmm.
you wish that an agent was doing things for you? And that's
Mm-hmm.
where you get into this autonomous agent stuff, wherein there's two words here, right? Autonomous and agent. Agent is something that does something on your behalf, right? So you've
Right.
created a software, or there's a software that does stuff for you. And the autonomous part is you've given it certain decision making ability,
Mm-hmm.
wherein it is able to make some calls on its own, right? Or some decisions on its own. And I think a lot of my previous, like earlier work in the career, which is like the agents that I built with Toyota, kind of have informed some of my investigations right now. I am super bullish on doing agents this year because there are these one-off tasks that are tasks that you don't want to be present for, and there is software that you can use an LLM to generate a step of action plan, and then using APIs execute that, right? And so we've seen that very infancy last year with Baby AGI or AutoGPT. I think this year there'll be a lot more, just like RAG was investigating last year and this year is productionizing. I think there'll be a more of investigation for autonomous agents this year, and maybe we'll come up with a framework or few frameworks where you can create your own agent, and you'll have an army of agents in your
Right.
enterprise do that. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what I'm looking forward to. I've created this whole framework for fine tuning, which I've open sourced, but then
Mm-hmm.
I'm using it myself for building these agents, creating like this structured XML like looking way in which you specify, this is my agent, this is the goal. The agent gives you the plan, you say yes or no, and then it'll go and continue these actions for you, right? So I'm building
Nice.
the data set, I'm training the models, and I'm super excited about doing this year.
Awesome. And you mentioned that you have open sourced your project.
I've open sourced the fine tuning component.
Okay. Okay.
Me and a friend of mine, we started doing fine tuning early November, I want to say,
I
after a
see.
few of the previous projects that I worked on. And so we started, like I said, investigating what does fine tuning exactly entail? What do you have to watch
Mm-hmm.
out for? So there's these really interesting things we are learning in fine tuning, like if you have a human assistant kind of
Mm-hmm.
prompt, the
Right.
last one, if you do not say what the next step is, the assistant part will continue. But if you say human assistant,
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
Mm-hmm.
human assistant, assistant says something, it will say what the assistant needs to say. So there's like these small gotchas that I'm only learning through the fine tuning framework. And I think that framework is at a point where every day I can launch like 3 or 4 experiments. I'm only billed by like how much compute I used. So it's become like this really robust framework for me to use internally for my agent research. And so I've kind of put it out there because
Mm-hmm.
I believe in letting other people's fine tune and figuring out what that means for their use cases. So it's an open source project right now. I'm happy to share a link after
Yes.
the call so that we can post about it. But at the end of the day, I think your use case might be different than autonomous agents,
Mm-hmm.
but the fine tuning part still works. So if you have
Yeah.
a tabular data that looks like this is the prompt and this is the completion, the fine tuning framework will work wonders for you.
Fair enough. That's pretty cool that you opened the specific, especially like the important part as open source, which is fine tuning.
Yeah.
So, in building all of this and on your research, what's the trickiest part that you thought while building these autonomous agents?
So I think over the last year, working with a couple of companies, my infrastructure expertise has grown well enough that I've like figured out how
Nice.
do you orchestrate these on these shiny GPUs, or on multiple GPU same node, or multiple GPU multiple node kind of schemes. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that is a very hard part about the infrastructure side of things. Now, if somebody else is taking care of the orchestration and infra for you, in this case, like this fine tuning the fine tuning framework, then you are focusing the hardest thing that you have to do is like figure out whether the fine tuning is actually helping or not the way in
Oh.
which you're answering. Because at the end of the day, fine tuning does seem to help, but again, unless you have that true north metric, there are some cases where the fine tuning might not be as proficient as just using prompt, because
Hmm.
you might be overtraining it, overfitting the model, and so on. So you need to, I think, running multiple experiments and knowing what decisions to make rather than trial and error
Hmm.
is the hardest part for a non-infrastructure person, right? I think making sure that your model is going towards your true north and not like, oh, let me try to change this one parameter and see what happens. I think that's a very
Right.
bad idea because the costs are very prohibitive to do this
Hmm.
kind of research. But I think if you are reading enough papers, if you're reading enough, like, hey, this is what the data looks like, look at the examples, look at the inputs, look at the outputs, and realize what is going on. Maybe it's not anything about the fine tuning framework, it's about your data. Go and fix your
Right.
data. Try to get human feedback in your data to improve it. And there's advanced techniques like DPO, which seems to be more popular than RLHF these days. But there's a combination of both that you can use to train your model. And so figuring out, like, are you do you have the right data to fit the model to go towards your use case? All three of them are the biggest challenge.
That's great. That's actually, I learned a lot from you today.
Yeah.
But before we call it a day, I have one
Yeah.
last question for you. For
Mhm.
the community that is adopting to build such agents, what would you advise them to focus more on, or even actually even better is like, how do you advise them to get started? I know you mentioned about like,
Yeah.
reading, making sure what if fine tuning is helping, but how would you advise them to get started?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think a lot of people are excited about trying new things. In our last
Hmm.
meetup, we had some group discussions or breakout discussions, and the track that got the most number of people to say yes, I want to talk about this is like agents, small or large models. What's next? And I think a lot of
Hmm.
people want to learn the next new thing. So what I'd recommend is you find groups, or you might be the person to create a new group. Meet up for coffee, meet up for drinks. Just have a casual chat. It doesn't have to be this swanky food and drinks are sponsored kind of event. Just form your own group, figure out the right people at a hackathon, or through your network who are building this. Start talking to each other and form this community. In fact, like me and another friend of mine who's in the autonomous agent space, we are starting some really cool meetups here in San Francisco, only on autonomous agents. So there's going to be a South Bay one in sometime in February, and I'll be having one in San Francisco soon. So find your kindred spirits who are doing autonomous
Right.
agents. Learn from everybody else, because at the end of the day, I think LLMs hold really big power in the
Mhm.
way we are going to shape the next phase of what work really means.
Right.
And I think doing things autonomously would take a lot of the human, like, frustration and burden away, so that we can actually work on human to human kind of network, right? You and I can have a conversation, we can grab a coffee if something else is doing all the drudge work for us, right? And I think that's fascinating, and that's where I want to be.
Sounds good. I am totally with you. I find learning from others actually the fastest way to learn.
I love it, right?
More, yeah, yeah, I absolutely enjoy it. And I think participating in hackathons just get you into those, using tools and
Yeah.
bringing up ideas and everything. So yeah, I think you're right on point. Awesome. I think that's all the questions I had for you today. And it was lovely speaking with you. Thanks again for taking the time to be on my podcast and, answering all the questions and sharing your knowledge today.
I love it. I love to do this thing. If somebody wants to connect with me on LinkedIn or follow me, feel free to link up with the QR code that you're about to share with them. But
Yes.
I did have a couple of things to talk. One is we have an upcoming meetup in the South Bay in Silicon Valley. So if you live in the South Bay area, February 13th is when the MLOps community has a Silicon Valley event. So we'd love to see you guys there. And there's workshops that we are organizing in San Francisco. There's more stuff that we're doing for the community. I really hope I get to see you guys there and we learn from each other.
Sounds good. Thanks a lot, Rahul.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Have a nice rest of the week. Thank you for having me.